I had a question this month, which I think is a really important one. It's quite a tricky topic with OCD to some degree, but it was, do you have any advice when OCD interferes with sex? So, this is a topic that might be, a big one, so to speak, and it might take more than, half an hour really to give this justice, but I thought I might give some ideas of how I work on this with clients, the types of ideas we might explore, because I think it's a really important topic with OCD, which isn't always talked about. It's a difficult topic to talk about, especially for us Brits or English people that are infamous for being uptight about these sort of topics. So you'll have to bear with me if we're less free and open about this than our friends on the other side of the pond. But yeah, I wanted to look at, how it can interrupt this area of our life, and then think about some ideas from ACT, about how we might work with this. And feel free to put any questions in the chat bar. We'll also have an opportunity later on if anyone has any other questions off the back of this. So if, the way you experience OCD and anxiety and other difficulties, if it doesn't interrupt this area of your life, then you could just substitute anything into this that is something that is blocked or is difficult because of OCD or anxiety. So if sex is fine and there's no problems there, but you've given up on important hobbies, or it's got in the way of your work, or it's got in the way of relationships in a different way, then probably everything I say today should hopefully be relevant to that. But actually, I know from working with many, many clients, this does become a difficulty, and it is a tricky area. And as someone who's experienced OCD intensely in the past, I know it was something that was tricky for me, in the past. And as I was younger and growing up and sort of exploring these areas, it was difficult because of anxiety and OCD. And so, many of the themes of OCD, the common themes, can be impacted by this topic, I would say. So, the obvious ones are if we have more the intrusive thoughts, the mental compulsion side of themes, things like, sexual themes, harm themes, relationship themes, sexual orientation themes. Obviously, all of these are so interrelated with sex that there's probably no way there's not going to be some interaction there. Equally with other themes like, things like contamination and checking and, hyper awareness, false memories, false events, all this sort of stuff can intertwine with this. So, one big area where it can be very difficult is a lot of clients I work with might be experiencing a lot of very problematic and difficult intrusive images. So you get in these really horrifying images related to, unwanted sexual imagery or harming imagery or things like that. And that stuff is getting into your mind. And of course, in the world of sex, that's going to make it quite distressing and difficult. It's going to distract you, highly distress you probably, and often, drive those compulsions. So the compulsions it might drive might be complete avoidance, complete shutdown, not going to go near this area of my life, going to put it on hold. It could drive compulsions around checking. How do I feel? Am I aroused? Am I attracted to people? Am I not? What does this sensation in my body mean? Is it meaningful? Things like the groinal, which is sort of jargon in OCD world for sort of unwanted, difficult or confusing feelings in our groinal area related to sort of attraction and arousal. That, is really very much related to the compulsion of checking. We check how we're feeling. The more we check, the more we feel sensations in different parts of our body. And then we can get kind of hyper awareness processes going on where our attention is scanning and judging and analyzing or trying to suppress or push away. And all of this creates more sensations and feelings in this area of our body that then feed this sort of cycle. Contamination. I've worked with many clients that might have fears around things like AIDS, HIV, other sexually transmitted diseases, other sort of contamination aspects could get in there. Moral scrupulosity, we might worry, is my is the way I relate to my sex life, is it right, is it moral, is it correct? And people can get very fixed upon what is the right way to express your sexuality and such like. Obviously, sexual orientation can play out in different ways. People who are straight can worry they're gay. People who are gay can worry they're straight. We can be bisexual and confused about how we want to express that, what we want to do. There can be all kinds of ways this plays out, and I'm sure many people on the call have experienced this. I could say a lot more, but there's some of the areas, and I think the most painful, tragic thing about this is it might shut down this area of someone's life completely. And obviously, for vast majority of people, our sex life, intimacy is one of the most rewarding, pleasurable, enjoyable, connecting part of our life. And so, I think it's a real tragedy when I work with a client that, may have gone years, not engaging with their sort of fantasy world, their sex life, all of that. So I think, it's from an ACT point of view, where we do exposure practice around values-based exposure, clearly this is a big area to practice exposure. And we'll look at that later, how you might do that. Obviously, the word exposure in sex life is, has a different context sometimes, but we're talking about, exposure and response prevention here, and how we face these fears, these anxieties, and reclaim this area of our life. One other area is, I know when I was struggling with intense mental health challenges, when you're having sort of almost all day panic levels of anxiety rolling back and forth, or intense depression that just really shuts you down, sex life, fantasy, attraction, all of that stuff just goes out the window, because really our body is in survival mode, and it's going to deprioritize mating, and it's going to favor sort of survival systems, and it's why our appetite can go, and we don't want to eat, and we don't want to so that can be a really difficult area where libido is just shut down, and we just don't even think about this part of our life, or you just couldn't even imagine it. And I certainly experienced that when things were intense. It's the last thing on your mind. So that's the sort of some of the ideas about how OCD can interrupt this part of our life. Of course, also just the compulsions, getting stuck in compulsions can distract us, pull us away, make it very hard to engage in intimacy, connection, and sex. So what can we do about this? How can we work on this? I think number one, if this is a really intense area of your life, i.e. it's really shut down, it's driving a lot of OCD compulsions and difficulties, then working with a therapist who understands exposure and response prevention, ACT for OCD, has good experience on the various presentations of OCD, not just the sort of the forms that are more widely known, but the intrusive thoughts, the taboo thoughts, these more problematic, difficult areas where we might have intrusive thoughts about sexual imagery about people, and topics and things that just it can be abhorrent to the sufferer. They really are disgusted and really in so much pain by this stuff. You need a therapist who kind of understands that and gets that. So that would be number one. Number two is really from an ACT process. We really want to target diffusion on these intrusive images, intrusive thoughts, urges. So diffusion is this idea in ACT where, it's cognitive diffusion. We want to have the ability to observe our thoughts, observe our images in our mind with some sense of distance, some sense of non-reactivity, non-judgmental awareness, so that we take the power out of them to influence our behavior and to distract us and pull us out of life. So this is really obviously going to be a key process and skill here. And this is very difficult to do with these types of intrusive thoughts. When I struggled with this stuff in the past, I started meditation long time before I did therapy and got into ACT and became a therapist and trained in things. I had many years of really intense intrusive images while I was practicing meditation. And it is tough, very difficult to have a diffused, accepting in the sense that we're accepting right now I have these difficult thoughts in my head, not accepting the content of them or the theme or the idea of them, but accepting right now I have these intrusive thoughts in my head. So you might want to look at the diffusion videos on my YouTube channel, the Mindfulness Circle, the playlist, OCD Skills there has a lot of ideas on diffusion, and really just learning to notice our mind and let go of the mental compulsion. So observe the automatic intrusive thoughts, the images, the verbal thoughts, and not to start doing the mental compulsions, the suppression, the reassurance, the analysis, the worry, the planning, the check-in, all of those mental compulsions and more that might get activated. We want to let go of that stuff and just observe our mind, be able to just notice it. Like imagine, you go to have sex and you've got a really annoying song in your head. You've got the Venga Bus playing in your head. Probably you're going to be able to go, well, on an ideal day, I wouldn't want that song playing in my head, but it is here right now. So let's just engage in sex and let the Venga Bus play in the background. We want to try and get the ability to have the same relationship with these sorts of intrusive thoughts and worries. So practicing lots of diffusion, getting really good at observing our mind, really good at not doing the compulsions, realizing that the compulsions are not workable. They are not the thing that keeps anyone safe. They are not the thing that proves you're a good person. They are the thing that digs the hole of suffering deeper and deeper with OCD. So related to that, we're going to want to start to urge surf those compulsions. So the compulsions could be physical. They could be things like avoidance. They could be checking behaviors online to check how I feel around, am I attracted to people? It could be checking the body. And that's really more of a mental compulsion where, we're checking how we feel. And then we analyzing and ruminating and worrying about feelings and sort of judging them. It could be other, overt behaviors out in the world where we, even might have impulsive, sexual relationships to kind of prove that, we are something, or, that this kind of stuff. So there could be all kinds of physical compulsions that we would want to start to urge surf. Same with any of the contamination type stuff that might get in here as well. And then, we want to urge surf the mental compulsions as well, so that we can really get out of that and into the experience, which is, another key principle here. Acceptance of feelings, so acceptance of anxiety, acceptance of confusion, uncertainty, acceptance of even disgust that could be there, trying to bring this skill of being able to non-judgmentally notice that, make room for that, allow that to rise and fall. And again, there's acceptance practices on my channel if you want to look at that more. I like the acceptance practice NAME, which is an acronym for notice. So you notice what you're feeling, you notice what your mind's doing in reaction to the feeling, then you acknowledge it by name, then you make room for it, you curiously investigate it, observe it, open up and soften and give it some space in the body, and then engage or expand and engage into life and what you're doing. So you might want to look at that if you're having a lot of embodied feelings, a lot of anxiety around this area, or depression, or something like that, shutting you down or affecting the libido, building up those acceptance abilities. And the same around the checking compulsions around arousal and the groinal and stuff, the ability to just acknowledge that without getting caught in the analysis and rumination and judgment and worry and all the mental compulsions. Just to acknowledge, okay, right now, got sensations in my body, fine, whatever. Nerves are firing, that's what they're going to do. So, that would lead us on to really the most important point, which is engaging in what we're doing, putting our mind into the experience, really engaging and focusing. And, this is an ancient principle in the world of sex, right? You go right back to, the tantric practices and, different yoga schools and even, certain Tibetan Buddhist schools and things like that. the mindful engagement in sex is an ancient sort of practice, and it's a really powerful one here. We want to be in the experience, deeply in it. If we're having these intrusive thoughts and worries, we want to be able to acknowledge that, notice that, and then refocus back into what we're doing, to connect into, if we're with a partner, to engage with them, know what they're experiencing, focus on that. How can we make it better and more pleasurable and more enjoyable for them? What are we experiencing? Be in our body, really keep coming out of these thought loops and into the body and the experience of it. The same in our own sort of intimacy, our own fantasy world, getting deeply into that experience. So really, learning to practice present moment attention. And that's very difficult when the mind is throwing you all this difficult thought processes, flashing these horrible images at you. Just that ability to acknowledge that and then come back deeply into the experience. So, related to this, then I was thinking, we're really into gradual exposure. How do I gradually get back into this area of my life? And, it might be, some therapists might say, go straight for the intense stuff and, go for the highest level of the exposure hierarchy here. I think sometimes that's too much to ask of people, especially if this area of your life has been shut down for years. It's a lot to ask someone to suddenly just go out there and, try and have sex again, or pleasure themselves or whatever. So, instead of that, we might want to do a gradual exposure. So how do I start to just think about these topics again and let my mind, fantasize, or, go towards imagery? How do I engage with this in a way that fits my values, what I believe in the world, how I want to treat other people, and it might be, working on that process yourself. And you can see that within sex therapy, lots of good books on sex therapy where they'll use the concept of gradual exposure to reclaim that area of your life, either on your own or with a partner. It's going to help a lot to have a supportive partner, to have someone who understands that you're experiencing anxiety and OCD, or at the very least that you're anxious and it's distracting and making this area hard for so many potential innuendos I could say here, but making this area difficult for you. So you want to have someone who hopefully there's trust and understanding, that can be very supportive and not judgmental, not shaming, and not put a level of that stuff on you, and understands that human sex lives in relationships, long-term relationships, short-term encounters, these things are complex, and they're not like Hollywood plays them out. It's much messier, and, not everyone finds this area easy in their life. People find this really difficult. So you want someone who's supportive and compassionate and kind about that, and can, support this process really. So gradual exposure, building up an exposure hierarchy, linking it to your values, values around connection, kindness, intimacy, pleasure, excitement, adventure, all kinds of values that could be in this area of your life. Sexuality, on a lot of the ACT values graphics that show all the different possible values, they'll list that there. So thinking about that value, how you build that up, how you reclaim this area of your life, and doing it very gradually, and working at the edge of your threshold where you feel not comfortable, but you feel you can use your skills still, and then moving up the next. So when I say you can use your skills, you can practice diffusion, you can practice acceptance, you can practice present moment attention, you're in touch with your values, there is self-compassion there, working at that level of skill, and then move into something a little bit more difficult, a little bit more challenging. And we would have to adapt this in therapy. You'd have to think about how this applies to relationship OCD or sexual themes, harm themes, other difficult themes here, contamination, check-in, responsibility, different things like that. We'd have to think, how do you adapt that hierarchy and that staging to what's difficult, and what are the compulsions, and what have we got to, get out of there? And sometimes we have to undermine the unworkable beliefs that sit below this stuff, especially with relationship OCD type stuff, where we might hold all these myths about love and relationships that come to us from a very young age from Hollywood. We're sort of brainwashed from a young age in cartoons and then movies and TV shows, and about like what long-term relationships, what relationships are like. And really, it's not true. It's not what we understand in psychology. And that's why divorce rates are high, 50, 60%, and people struggle in long-term relationships because they carry a lot of these, it's not the only reason for that, but it's one of the reasons they carry these myths about, that a relationship should always be easy and sex life should always feel easy. And actually, no, it takes work, communication, talking about things, exploring things, trying things out, really communication is the key. So, with things like that, we would have to get more targeted and maybe go for those underlying beliefs that are unworkable, explore why they're unworkable in the sense that they don't help you live your values and goals, and then how to bring skills in there to diffuse and unhook from these unworkable beliefs. Finally, because that's quite a lot of ideas, but finally, I would say self-compassion. Lots of self-compassion. People have tons of shame around this area. It's really difficult. A lot of people will struggle with intense self-criticism, shame, and self-loathing and things around this. So we want to change that to self-compassion. We want to bring in a lot of compassion for how difficult this area is for you. You did not choose this. You did not cause this. There could be trauma in this for some people. So, we might want to work on trauma with a therapist that understands that, if there's sort of psychosexual trauma or developmental trauma or gets all of that. And that might not be the case. Obviously, that's not the case with a lot of people with OCD, but, that can be the case. Some people I've worked with, that's been a factor. We've had to work on self-compassion to the past, the shame, some trauma work, some, values-based exposure work on the trauma as well. So that would be some of my ideas on this topic. I think it's a tough, really difficult topic. So really working with a therapist if it's challenging would be key. Yes, just preempting, some of the barriers to what I might have said there, what people struggle with is they might say, well, these intrusive thoughts are so distressing and upsetting, or the urge to do compulsions is so distracting that I just can't engage in sex. I just can't connect with it. And I would say, yes, right now that's the case, but how much diffusion have we practiced? How good have we got at watching our mind to be able to just let the thoughts come and go like leaves on the stream? Maybe notice and name them if needed. So say, okay, I'm noticing a sexual thought, and then refocus back on what we're doing. How good have we gotten at observing our mind, diffusing? And if we get better at that, will it be easier? Sometimes it's hard to put the compulsions down in this area because we feel that's the thing that's keeping other people safe or protecting ourselves. It might relate to the core fears, where there are core fears around hurting other people or ourselves being hurt, or harmed, or misery and unhappiness for others or ourselves. So, we might really believe still that the compulsions are the thing that's protecting people, but actually look at our experience. It's not. The compulsions are the things that are making our life miserable and pulling us away from people, making us actually less connected and less present with people. So we have to take that bold move, to really surf the urges, to do the compulsions, try to let them go, try to unhook from the mental compulsions that are a big thing here. Actually, often, it's predominantly mental compulsions we're talking about. So practice that, practice engaging, undermine those unworkable beliefs that make us think that, the compulsions are the things keeping people safe. And then gradual exposure, I'd say, is relevant to that. Okay, we're not going to leap in at the deep end and expect you to go out and try and meet someone and have sex immediately and do all of that. But like, can we at least, just imagine stuff again, go into our imaginary world? And, if we do that and our mind goes on to the OCD stuff, that's the mental training. That's the notice and come back to the chosen, imaginary stuff that we're engaging with, the things that we value, the things that matter to us. So you notice your mind going off onto the OCD mental circuits, the intrusive thoughts come in and then the compulsions want to start. You notice that and you come back to that fantasizing that imaginary world, or watching a movie or something with this kind of content and topic in, or a TV show or something like that. And, let's start there and get good at diffusing, good at letting this stuff be a radio, the intrusive thoughts be a radio in the background, letting go of the mental compulsions and engaging deeply in it. If we've got kind of the false memory stuff and we're just so worried we've done something bad in the past, we've harmed someone, hurt someone in some way, well, that's the same. It's that checking compulsion, that going over the past, reviewing, that causes more confusion. There's an unworkable belief that the more I look at the memories, the better my information and data will be. But that's not the case with memories. The more we review, the more we go over it, the more uncertain we're going to be, the more confused we're going to get, and the more we're going to misread, the fragments of our memory that we have left. So actually doing that brave thing of going, as far as I know, I didn't do anything, and I'm going to engage in my life, and I'm going to live my values now, and I'm not going to review that memory and go over it and try and figure out what happened and what happened at that time. If depression and I sometimes had my existential themes would get in there. They would say, what's the point? There's no point in this. There's no point in this part of your life. Life's meaningless, or, all of that sort of stuff. So the same, okay, can I diffuse from that thought, notice that thought come and go, and then engage in this thing I value? And I get to choose that. I choose my values. I don't need to justify that to OCD and, debate and argue what my values are. I choose them, put them into action, live them in a diffused and present moment way. And I see how it works for me in the long run, without all that analysis and rumination and judgment and worry and those thought loops. So yeah, hopefully something useful in what I've talked about. Again, if you're not struggling with sex, just apply everything I said to the areas of your life where you are struggling, the important activities, the relationships, the things you want to be doing in your life that are difficult because of OCD. Everything I've said there would be relevant, in the same way there. So